The observation deck of Vrexus 9 station buzzed with excitement as hundreds of spectators pushed through the corridors leading to the galactic combat arena. The massive circular structure floated in the heart of the commercial sector, its transparent walls offering a breathtaking view of distant stars and passing ships. But today nobody was looking at the stars. All eyes were fixed on the combat floor below, where the greatest warrior in arena history was about to face another challenger. Croth 9 stood alone in the preparation chamber, his forearms moving through a warm-up routine he had performed thousands of times. The Vexorian warrior towered at 7 feet 4 inches, his body covered in natural armor plates that gleamed like polished black metal under the bright lights. Each plate overlapped perfectly with the next, creating a defense that had never been broken. His triple-jointed limbs bent at angles that would be impossible for most species, giving him reach and flexibility that seemed almost unfair. The warrior's eyes were dark and multifaceted, capable of tracking multiple targets at once. But more impressive than his size or his armor was his speed. Vexorians possessed reflexes that operated 3 times faster than the average galactic species. What appeared as a blur to most beings, Croth 9 saw in comfortable slow motion. He could read body language, predict movements, and react before an attack could land. This biological advantage had made him untouchable in the arena. 847 victories, a voice announced through the chamber's speaker system. It was his manager reviewing the stats that everyone already knew. 12 years undefeated. Not a single loss on your record. Not even a successful strike against you. Croth 9's mandibles clicked together in a gesture of satisfaction. He had faced warriors from dozens of species. Huge opponents with crushing strength. Fast opponents with venomous strikes. Technical fighters with elaborate strategies. None of it mattered. His reflexes turned every fight into a predictable dance where he knew every step before his opponent did. Today's challenger was different in an unexpected way. A human. Croth 9 had heard stories about them since their planet joined the galactic community 5 years ago. They were the newcomers, the fresh faces in the trading stations and diplomatic halls. Physically they were nothing special. No natural weapons like claws or fangs. No armored skin. No enhanced senses. Their reflexes were average at best. They were soft, vulnerable, and unremarkable. This particular human had gotten herself into trouble in the docking sector 3 days ago. A Vexorian merchant had offered her engine parts at triple the standard rate, and she had refused the deal with what the merchant called insulting directness. The merchant happened to be connected to Croth 9's social circle, and the insult became a matter of honor. When station diplomats failed to smooth things over, the case went to the arena. It was the old way, the traditional way. Combat would settle the dispute. Croth 9 wasn't angry at the human. He didn't even care about the trade dispute. But the arena was his home, his purpose, and he took pride in teaching lessons to those who disrespected Vexorian culture. This fight would be quick. Painless even. He would demonstrate his superiority, the human would yield, and honor would be satisfied. Easy. Across the arena, in the opposite preparation chamber, Captain Sophie Grant stared at her data pad with growing frustration. The screen displayed Croth 9's fight history in brutal detail. 847 wins. 0 losses. 0 successful hits against him. Some fights lasted 3 minutes. Others ended in under 10 seconds. She scrolled through video footage of his recent matches. Every opponent, regardless of their species or fighting style, met the same fate. They would attack and Croth 9 would simply not be there anymore. His counters came faster than thought, his defensive movements perfectly timed. He made professional warriors look like clumsy children. Sophie was 5 feet 8 inches tall with brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her gray jumpsuit was standard freight hauler gear, practical and worn from years of use. She had calluses on her hands from loading cargo and repairing equipment, not from combat training. She looked exactly like what she was, a cargo pilot trying to make a living on the edges of civilized space. But that wasn't the whole story. Before the freight runs, before the endless hyperspace jumps between stations, Sophie had spent 8 years as a mixed martial arts instructor on Earth. She had trained hundreds of students in everything from boxing to wrestling to kickboxing. She understood body mechanics, leverage, timing, and strategy. She knew how to read opponents and exploit weaknesses. Not that any of it seemed to matter now. She watched the footage again, studying Croth 9's movements frame by frame. His fighting style was purely defensive. He waited for opponents to commit to attacks, then used their own momentum against them. His superior reflexes let him see attacks coming before they arrived. He reacted to the smallest tells, a shift in weight, a tensing of muscles, a change in breathing. The door to her chamber slid open and a station official entered. The alien was a short, gray-skinned Rendathi with large eyes and a tablet in his hands. "Captain Grant, the arena master requires your confirmation. Do you accept the terms of combat?" Sophie set down her datapad. "What happens if I refuse?" "Criminal charges for insulting a trade representative. Station exile. Your freight license will be revoked across this entire sector." The official's voice was neutral, just stating facts. "You would need to find work at least 4 jumps from here." 4 jumps. That would put her in territory she didn't know, with no contacts and no reputation. She'd be starting from zero, and her ship needed expensive repairs she couldn't afford. Refusing meant losing everything she'd built over the past 5 years. "And if I fight and lose?" "Medical treatment is provided. No criminal record. The dispute is considered settled." Sophie stood and began stretching. Her muscles remembered the old routines, the movements she'd practiced thousands of times in gyms back on Earth. Her body wasn't young anymore. She was 34 now, and freight hauling wasn't kind to physical conditioning. But muscle memory ran deep. "I accept the terms," she said quietly. The official tapped his tablet. "You have 5 minutes before the match begins. The arena master wishes you honor in combat." When the door closed, Sophie continued her warm-up. She rolled her shoulders, loosened her neck, and worked through basic footwork patterns. The movements felt rusty but familiar. She knew she couldn't match Croth9's speed or strength. His reflexes would read her body language before she could complete any standard attack. Every technique she knew would be predictable to someone with his abilities. But there was one advantage humans had developed over millions of years of evolution. Humans could lie. Not just with words but with their entire bodies. They could fake left and go right. They could telegraph one movement and deliver another. They could override their own instincts and commit to actions that made no logical sense. Sophie took a deep breath and walked toward the arena entrance. The crowd's roar grew louder as the doors opened, revealing the massive combat floor beyond. Somewhere in that space, an undefeated champion was waiting. And Sophie was about to teach him that perfection had a weakness. The arena floor stretched 30 meters in diameter, its surface made of a dark material that absorbed impact without causing permanent injury. Sophie stepped through the entrance tunnel and into the blinding lights. The roar of the crowd hit her like a physical force. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the circular seating tiers, their voices blending into a wall of sound that made her chest vibrate. Above the arena, massive holographic displays showed her face next to Croth9's statistics. The contrast was brutal. His record glowed in bright gold numbers. Her image showed basic biometric data: height, weight, species classification. No combat history. No wins. No rankings. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings of all classifications," a voice boomed through the arena speakers. The commentator was a Threxian, its multiple vocal cords creating a resonant tone that cut through the crowd noise. "Welcome to Vrexis 9 Combat Arena. Today we witness a challenge match between our legendary champion and a human newcomer." Sophie walked toward the center of the arena, trying to ignore the screens that now showed her vitals in real time. Heart rate, respiration, body temperature, all displayed for the entertainment of the crowd. She could see her pulse climbing as nerves kicked in. Across from her, Croth9 emerged from the opposite tunnel. The crowd erupted. Beings jumped to their feet, chittering and roaring and cheering in dozens of languages. The Vexorian warrior raised all 4 arms in acknowledgement, his armor plates gleaming under the lights. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "Champion Croth9 stands at 7 feet 4 inches and weighs 420 pounds, the commentator continued. "His exoskeleton provides natural armor rated at level 8 hardness. His reflexes operate at 3.2 times standard galactic baseline. In 12 years of competition, he has never been struck by an opponent." Sophie stopped at her designated position, marked by a glowing circle on the floor. She was 15 meters from Croth9, but he looked even larger from this distance. His 4 arms hung loose and ready, each one capable of striking from unexpected angles. His dark eyes tracked her with the focused intensity of a predator. "The challenger is Captain Sophie Grant of Earth," the commentator said, and Sophie noticed the tone shift slightly, less excitement, more curiosity. "Height 5 feet 8 inches. Weight 145 pounds. No natural armor or enhanced reflexes. Combat record." There was a pause. No registered arena experience. The crowd's noise changed. Some beings laughed. Others made sounds of disbelief. A few shouted comments in languages Sophie didn't understand, but the tone was universal. They thought this was a joke. A mismatch. Entertainment in the form of watching an amateur get humbled by a master. An arena official, floating on a small hover platform, addressed both fighters. This is a sanctioned challenge match under traditional rules. Combat continues until one fighter yields or is rendered unable to continue. Lethal force is prohibited. Medical teams are standing by. Do both fighters understand and accept these terms? Accepted. Croth9's voice was deep and resonant, translated through a universal comm unit. Accepted, Sophie said, her voice steadier than she expected. The official raised one hand. Fighters, take your positions. Croth9 dropped into his signature defensive stance. His forearms spread wide, creating a defensive web that covered multiple angles. His legs bent slightly, weight distributed perfectly for instant movement in any direction. Sophie had seen this stance in the fight footage. From this position he could defend against attacks from front, sides, or above. It was textbook perfect. Sophie took a different approach. She stood naturally, almost casually, with her hands loose at her sides. Her feet were shoulder-width apart, weight slightly forward on the balls of her feet. To the crowd, it probably looked like she didn't know what she was doing. But this was the stance she'd taught hundreds of students. Neutral, balanced, ready to move in any direction without telegraphing intent. Her mind raced through everything she remembered from watching Croth9's fights. He was patient. He let opponents come to him. He read their body language. The shift of weight before a kick, the shoulder rotation before a punch, the hip turn before a spinning move. His superior reflexes turned those tiny tells into prediction. He knew where attacks were going before they arrived. Every fighter she'd watched had tried to outspeed him or overpower him. They threw fast combinations, powerful strikes, elaborate techniques. And every single one of them failed because Croth9's reflexes were faster than fast. He saw their intentions in their bodies and reacted before the action completed. Sophie had spent the last hour thinking about a basic principle from her teaching days. Fighting wasn't just about speed or strength. It was about decision-making. Every technique in martial arts was built on certain assumptions. That your body would move efficiently, that your opponent would be where you expected, that physics and leverage would work in predictable ways. But what happened when you deliberately violated those assumptions? What happened when you committed to movements that made no sense? Croth9's reflexes were built to predict efficient, logical attacks. Could they predict illogical ones? The arena official's hand dropped. Begin. The crowd fell into a strange hush, the kind of silence that happens when thousands of beings hold their breath at once. Croth9 didn't move. His defensive stance remained perfect, his forearms ready to intercept any attack from any angle. His dark eyes tracked Sophie's every micro-movement. Sophie started to circle slowly to her left. Her footwork was deliberate, each step measured. She kept her hands loose, her breathing steady. Croth9 rotated smoothly to maintain his defensive coverage, his movements economical and precise. He was giving her time, letting her commit to an attack so he could demonstrate his superiority. The commentator's voice broke the silence. The champion employs his traditional patient approach, waiting for the challenger to make the first move. Note his perfect defensive posture, covering all primary attack vectors. Sophie continued circling, and a memory surfaced from her teaching days. She had trained a student once, a young man who was incredibly fast but predictable. Every sparring session he would throw the same combinations because they worked against slower opponents. Sophie had taught him a hard lesson. She'd started throwing techniques that didn't make sense. Fake punches that turned into nothing. Steps that went nowhere. Movements that violated efficient body mechanics. The young man's speed had become a liability because his brain kept predicting her next move based on what made sense, and Sophie kept doing things that didn't make sense. His reflexes reacted to attacks that never came and missed the ones that did. Croth9 was faster than that student. Much faster. But he was also relying on the same principle, reading body language and predicting logical movements. His entire undefeated record was built on that ability. Sophie stopped circling. She stood perfectly still for 3 seconds, just breathing. The crowd murmured in confusion. Croth9's stance didn't change, but she saw his eyes narrow slightly. He was waiting for her to commit. She took one step forward. Just one. Nothing aggressive, nothing threatening. Croth9's weight shifted microscopically, his reflexes preparing for possibilities. Then Sophie smiled, and in that moment she made her decision. She would show him what unpredictability really meant. Sophie took another step forward, then another. Her movement was casual, almost careless, like someone walking through a park rather than approaching a legendary warrior. Croth 9 maintained his defensive stance, all four arms positioned to intercept attacks from multiple angles. His dark eyes tracked her feet, her hips, her shoulders, reading the story her body told about what would come next. The crowd leaned forward in their seats. This was the moment they always waited for. The moment when an overconfident challenger would finally attack and learn why Croth 9 had never been touched. Some spectators had their recording devices ready, wanting to capture the exact instant when the human realized her mistake. Sophie shifted her weight to her left foot. Her left shoulder dipped slightly, her left hand rising just a fraction. Every signal in her body language screamed that she was about to move left. Croth 9's reflexes read these signals instantly, processing them 3 times faster than a normal being could. His weight adjusted, his right arms positioning to intercept the obvious attack coming from that direction. But Sophie's left foot never completed the step. Mid-motion she redirected. Her weight transferred to her right side instead, her body committing fully to the opposite direction. It wasn't a feint in the traditional sense. Those involved fake movements that never committed. This was something different. She had begun a real movement left, engaged the muscles, shifted her balance, then consciously overridden her own momentum to explode right. Croth 9's superior reflexes betrayed him. They had already predicted left, already committed to the counter, already moved his body to intercept an attack that wasn't coming. For the first time in 12 years he was out of position. Sophie closed the distance in a heartbeat. Her first strike was a sharp, straight punch aimed at the articulation point where Croth 9's jaw connected to his skull. The Vexorian armor was nearly impenetrable across most of his body, but joints needed flexibility to function. That flexibility meant gaps. Small ones, but they existed. Her knuckles connected with the soft tissue between armor plates. It wasn't a power punch designed to knock him out. It was a precise strike to a nerve cluster, the kind of shot that disrupted signals between brain and body. Croth 9's head snapped to the side, not from the force but from the sudden confusion of sensation. He tried to counter with his lower right arm, a sweeping strike that should have caught Sophie in the ribs. But she was already moving. Her second strike came before his counter could complete. A low kick to the side of his forward knee, hitting the joint at an angle that hyperextended the ligaments. Not enough to cause permanent damage under arena rules, but enough to compromise his balance. Croth 9 stumbled. His forearms windmilled as his body tried to compensate for the unexpected loss of stability. His reflexes were still processing what was happening. The human had moved in a way that made no physical sense. The body language had said left, but the action went right. His prediction system had no reference for this. Sophie's third strike targeted his midsection, specifically a nerve cluster that her research had identified in the Vexorian anatomy files available on the station database. Her palm strike hit just below his primary chest plate, where the armor was thinner to allow for breathing flexibility. The impact sent a shock through his nervous system, causing his lower arms to go momentarily numb. The crowd had started to make noise, gasps, shouts, sounds of disbelief, but Sophie didn't hear any of it. Her focus had narrowed to a single point. She had trained for years to enter this state, where time seemed to slow and every movement flowed naturally from the last. Her body remembered combinations, sequences, the rhythm of striking. Croth 9's upper left arm finally came around in a counter-strike, fast enough to blur even to the enhanced cameras recording the fight. But Sophie had already read his body position. She ducked under the strike, so close that she felt the rush of air as his limb passed over her head. As she dropped, her fourth strike rose to meet him, a sharp upward jab with her fingertips extended, hitting the optical ridge just above his right eye. The strike didn't damage his eye, but it hit another nerve cluster, one that caused his vision to blur and water involuntarily. Croth 9's perception, his greatest weapon, suddenly became unreliable. He couldn't see clearly. He couldn't predict what came next. Sophie's fifth and final strike was the one she'd planned from the beginning. She planted her back foot, rotated her hips, and drove a palm strike directly into Croth 9's thorax. The Vexorian respiratory system was different from humans. They had a primary breathing chamber protected by armor, but the impact point Sophie chose transmitted force through the armor plating into the soft tissue beneath. The strike drove the air from Croth 9's lungs in a sudden violent exhale. His body's automatic response was to gasp for breath, but the nerve disruption from the other strikes had confused his muscular control. For 3 long seconds he couldn't breathe properly. Croth 9's legs buckled. He dropped to one knee, his forearms hanging loose at his sides. His dark eyes were wide with shock, his breathing ragged as his body tried to recover. He looked up at Sophie, who had already stepped back into a neutral stance, her hands at her sides. The arena had gone completely silent. Not a single voice, not a single sound except for Krothnina's labored breathing. The holographic displays showed the fight statistics in bright, impossible numbers. Total elapsed time, 3.7 seconds. Successful strikes landed against Krothnina, 5. His undefeated record, broken. Sophie stood still, watching the warrior carefully. She hadn't come here to humiliate him or to showboat. She'd come because she had no choice, and she'd fought the only way she knew would work against someone with superior physical abilities. She'd made herself unpredictable. Krothnina remained on one knee, not because he couldn't stand, but because his mind was still catching up to what had happened. 12 years. 847 victories. Thousands of hours of training. A lifetime of perfecting his defensive art. And a human cargo pilot had struck him 5 times before he could mount a single effective counter. The arena official's hover platform descended quickly, positioning between the two fighters. His voice was uncertain, as if he didn't quite believe what he was about to say. Champion Krothnina has taken a knee. Does the champion yield, or does combat continue? Krothnina looked at Sophie for a long moment. His breathing had stabilized, his vision had cleared, and his body had recovered from the strikes. Physically he could continue. The damage had been minimal, precisely calculated to disrupt rather than destroy. But something in his eyes had changed. He raised one hand in the traditional gesture of surrender. "I yield," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sudden explosion of noise from the crowd. The arena erupted into chaos. Beings jumped from their seats, shouting in disbelief, arguing with their neighbors, replaying the footage on their personal devices. The impossible had just happened and no one could quite process it. Sophie let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash. She'd done it. She'd survived. The arena medical team rushed onto the combat floor within seconds of Krothnina's surrender. 3 technicians surrounded the Vexorian warrior with scanning devices, checking his vitals and assessing the damage from Sophie's strikes. Their equipment beeped and hummed as data streamed across holographic displays that floated above their portable units. Sophie stood off to the side, her arms hanging loose at her sides. Her heart was still racing, her breathing still elevated from the brief but intense exchange. A different medical technician approached her with a scanner, but she waved it away. "I'm fine. Check him first." The crowd continued its chaotic celebration of disbelief. Thousands of conversations were happening at once, beings arguing about what they just witnessed. The massive holographic screens above the arena played the fight footage on repeat, showing the 3.7 seconds from multiple angles. Each replay seemed to generate fresh waves of shock and excitement. In a private viewing booth high above the arena floor, a group of officials gathered around a control console. The arena master, a distinguished Karathi with silver scales and ceremonial robes, gestured at the screens with barely contained frustration. "Play it again. Slow it down to quarter speed." The footage rolled once more. Frame by frame, the officials watched Sophie's approach, her weight shift, the beginning of her movement left. Then the sudden change to the right, Krothnina's misplaced counter, and the rapid succession of 5 precise strikes that followed. "It makes no sense," one official muttered. "Look at her body mechanics in frame 47. She's committing to moving left, full weight transfer, muscle engagement, everything. Then in frame 51 she's going right instead. That's not physically possible without losing all power and balance." "But she didn't lose power," another official pointed out. "Each strike landed with enough force to be effective. Her balance was perfect throughout." The arena master pulled up a biometric scan of Sophie taken before the fight. "Run a full analysis. Check for cybernetic enhancements, stimulant use, reflex boosters, anything that could explain this." While the officials worked, a thin figure approached their booth from the outer corridor. Dr. Veniz was a Zentari scientist, known throughout the station for his research on comparative biology across galactic species. His gray skin seemed to shimmer in the booth's dim lighting, and his large eyes blinked slowly as he observed the footage playing on repeat. "You won't find any enhancements," he said quietly. The arena master turned. "Dr. Veniz, you've studied human physiology?" "Extensively. I was part of the first contact biological assessment team when Earth joined the galactic community." He moved closer to the screens, watching Sophie's movements with obvious interest. "What you witnessed is a rare demonstration of what we've termed tactical unpredictability." "Explain," the arena master demanded. Dr. Venice gestured at the frozen frame showing Sophie's weight shift. Most species in the galaxy have evolved enhanced physical abilities: speed, strength, armor, venom, sensory advantages. Humans evolved none of these. They're average in almost every measurable physical category. But they develop something far more unusual. They can consciously override their own instincts. One of the officials frowned. All intelligent beings can override instinct. That's what separates us from animals. Not to this degree, the doctor countered. Watch her movement again. She begins a legitimate leftward motion. Her muscles engage, her weight transfers. Every signal in her body commits to that direction. For any other species, once that commitment is made, completing the movement is the only efficient option. Changing direction mid-motion wastes energy and compromises balance. He paused the footage at the exact moment of Sophie's direction change. But humans can choose inefficiency. They can train their bodies to violate the principles of optimal movement. This human deliberately committed to a motion she intended to abandon. She lied with her entire body. And because Krothnina's reflexes are designed to predict efficient, logical movements, they predicted incorrectly. The officials studied the footage with new understanding. The arena master leaned back in his chair. So his superior speed became a disadvantage. Precisely. His reflexes moved him to counter an attack that never came, while the actual attack came from an unexpected vector. And because his processing speed is so fast, he committed to his counter before his conscious mind could override it. He was a victim of his own biological advantages. Down on the arena floor, the medical team had completed their assessment of Krothnine. The lead technician addressed the warrior, who was now standing upright. No permanent damage. Muscle strain in your right knee will heal within 2 days. The nerve disruptions are already fading. You were struck with remarkable precision. Krothnine rubbed his jaw absently, feeling the spot where Sophie's first punch had landed. The area was tender but not seriously injured. Each of her strikes had been calculated to disrupt rather than destroy. That realization bothered him more than the loss itself. She hadn't gotten lucky. She had known exactly where to hit and how hard. The Vexorian merchant who had initiated the challenge pushed through the crowd barrier, his voice loud and angry. This is cheating. She must have used technology. Scan her again. Sophie, who had been standing quietly while officials reviewed footage, finally spoke up. Scan me all you want. I didn't use anything except technique. The arena master's voice came through the speaker system. The challenge has been issued. Captain Grant, please submit to a complete technological scan to verify the legitimacy of your victory. Sophie walked to the center of the floor where a scanning array descended from the ceiling. The device hummed as it passed over her body, analyzing every cell and molecule for signs of artificial enhancement. The results displayed on the public screens for all to see. No cybernetic implants. No performance-enhancing chemicals. No reflex boosters or neural accelerators. No hidden weapons or force field generators. The scan showed a completely baseline human with slightly elevated adrenaline levels. Normal for someone who had just been in a fight. The merchant sputtered in outrage, but the evidence was undeniable. The arena master's voice returned. The scan confirms no technological assistance was used. Captain Sophie Grant's victory is legitimate and recognized under arena regulations. The challenge dispute is resolved in her favor. The crowd's noise shifted from disbelief to appreciation. Beings who had laughed at the mismatch now cheered for the underdog who had won through pure skill. Sophie's image on the screens was no longer a joke. It was the face of someone who had achieved the impossible. Krothnine watched the celebration with a strange expression. He had spent 12 years perfecting his art, studying countless fighting styles, training his body to peak performance. And a cargo pilot with basic martial arts training had exposed a fundamental flaw in his approach. She hadn't been faster or stronger. She had simply been different in a way he couldn't predict. He approached the arena official who was preparing to escort Sophie off the combat floor. I request a private meeting with Captain Grant. Immediately. The official looked uncertain. The captain is free to decline. I'll meet with him, Sophie interrupted. She looked at Krothnine directly, seeing something in his eyes that hadn't been there before the fight. Not anger or resentment, but genuine curiosity. The warrior nodded once. There is much I need to understand about how you fight. And perhaps much you can teach me. The private meeting chamber was simple and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaotic arena outside. The room held only a table, 2 chairs, and a small window that showed the stars beyond the station. Sophie sat on one side of the table, her jumpsuit still damp with sweat from the fight. Croth 9 sat across from her, his forearms resting on the table surface in a gesture of openness. For a long moment neither spoke. The warrior studied Sophie with those dark, multifaceted eyes, as if trying to understand a puzzle that had suddenly appeared in his ordered world. Finally he broke the silence. In 12 years I have faced 423 different opponents from 67 species, Croth 9 said slowly. I have studied every major fighting style in the known galaxy. I have trained against simulation programs designed by military strategists. And in 3.7 seconds you did something none of them could do. Sophie leaned back in her chair. I got lucky. No. Croth 9's mandibles clicked in what Sophie had learned was a gesture of disagreement. Luck is random. What you did was precise. Each strike targeted a specific weakness in Vexorian anatomy. You knew where our nerve clusters were located. You understood the gaps in our armor. That was research and planning, not luck. All right, Sophie admitted. I studied your species biology files. And I watched every one of your fights I could find. But the biology knowledge alone doesn't explain your movement, Croth 9 continued. My reflexes read body language. I see the micro-movements that predict attacks before they happen. Every being I've faced, regardless of their species, follows the same basic principle. Their body signals their intention. But you. He paused, struggling for words. You signaled left and went right. Your body committed fully to one direction, then changed mid-motion without losing power or balance. I have never encountered this. Sophie nodded slowly, considering how to explain something that humans took for granted. On Earth we don't have natural weapons. No claws, no armor, no venom. We're not the fastest or the strongest. For most of human history, we were prey animals for things bigger and more dangerous than us. So we learned to survive differently. She stood and moved to the open space in the room. We developed something called martial arts. It's not just fighting, it's the study of movement, leverage, timing, and psychology. And one of the key principles is this. You can train your mind to override your body's natural responses. Croth 9 watched intently as Sophie demonstrated a simple movement. She shifted her weight left, her whole body committing to the direction, then suddenly reversed to the right. See? My instincts tell me to complete the first movement because it's more efficient. But I can consciously choose inefficiency. I can lie with my body. But that violates basic physics, Croth 9 objected. Changing direction like that should cost you power and balance. It does cost something, Sophie agreed. But humans train for years to minimize that cost. We practice movements that don't make sense until our bodies learn to perform them efficiently. We call them feints, fakes, deceptions. They're designed to make opponents react to attacks that never come. She sat back down, her expression serious. Your reflexes are incredible, Croth 9. 3 times faster than human baseline. But speed became a disadvantage because your brain was making predictions based on efficient movement. When I moved inefficiently on purpose, your predictions were wrong. You committed to counters before your conscious mind could override them. Croth 9's arms moved in a complex gesture that Sophie couldn't interpret. He was silent for a long moment, processing the implications. My entire fighting style is based on reading opponents and reacting to their intentions. If humans can hide their intentions, we can't hide them completely, Sophie clarified. A trained fighter can still read human body language. But we can introduce doubt. We can make you second-guess what you're seeing. And in a fight, a moment of doubt is enough. The warrior looked down at his hands, or rather, his 4 hands. I have been arrogant. I believed my reflexes made me untouchable. I stopped studying my opponents because I thought physical advantages were enough. Sophie felt a flicker of sympathy for the warrior. She remembered her own lessons in humility, the times she'd been beaten by students who found gaps in her teaching. You're not the first fighter to learn this lesson. On Earth we have a saying, there's always someone better. The moment you think you've mastered everything is the moment you stop improving. Croth 9 met her eyes. Captain Grant, I owe you a formal apology. The trade dispute that brought us here was not your fault. The merchant overcharged you and you were right to refuse. I allowed my pride and my connections to turn a simple disagreement into a challenge match. That was wrong. Apology accepted, Sophie said simply. And for what it's worth, you're an incredible fighter. In a straight contest of speed and power, I wouldn't have lasted 10 seconds. I only won because I found a specific strategy that worked against your specific style. Which makes your victory more impressive, not less, Croth 9 replied. You identified my weakness and exploited it perfectly. He paused, then continued with obvious difficulty. I have a request. Will you teach me this tactical deception? I want to understand how humans fight. Sophie considered the request. She had cargo contracts waiting, repairs to schedule, a business to run. But something about the warrior's genuine humility made her reconsider. I can give you some basics. Enough to get you started. But real mastery takes years of practice. I have time, Croth9 said. And I have much to learn. They spent the next 2 hours in the training chamber. Sophie demonstrated basic feinting techniques, explaining the principle of committing to fake movements. Croth9 struggled at first. His Vexorian physiology made inefficient movement feel fundamentally wrong. But he was a dedicated student, and his frustration gradually turned to understanding. While they trained, word of the fight spread through Vrexus 9 station like wildfire. The footage played on every public screen, analyzed by every sports commentator and combat enthusiast in the sector. The story grew with each retelling, the human freight hauler who defeated the unbeatable champion. By the time Sophie returned to the docking bay, her communication device was flooded with messages. 3 security firms wanted to hire her as a combat instructor. A weapons manufacturer offered to sponsor her if she entered the professional arena circuit. A documentary crew requested interviews. News agencies from a dozen worlds wanted statements. Sophie ignored most of them. She climbed aboard her freight ship, a battered vessel called the Midnight Runner, and ran through her pre-flight checklist. The ship's computer chimed with another incoming message, but she dismissed it without looking. What she wanted right now wasn't fame or fortune. She wanted to finish her cargo run, make enough credits to pay for those engine repairs, and maybe find a quiet bar where nobody knew what had happened in the arena today. But as her ship lifted off from the docking platform, Sophie couldn't help but smile. She'd come to Vrexus 9 as a nobody, just another freight hauler trying to survive in the vastness of space. She was leaving as something different. Not because she'd won a fight, but because she'd taught a legendary warrior that perfection always has a weakness. Below, in the arena training chamber, Croth9 continued to practice the movements Sophie had shown him. His 4 arms moved through faint patterns, his body slowly learning to lie. It felt wrong, inefficient, contrary to every instinct his species had evolved. But that was exactly the point. And for the first time in 12 years, the undefeated champion felt like a student again. Across the galaxy, in security offices and military academies and combat training facilities, beings watched the arena footage and recognized something important. The humans weren't physically impressive. They didn't have natural weapons or enhanced abilities. But they had developed something more dangerous than strength or speed. They had learned to be unpredictable. Within a month, the first requests arrived on Earth for human combat instructors. By the end of the year, human martial arts schools had opened on 15 different worlds. The teaching spread, not because humans were superior fighters, but because they offered something the galaxy had never seen before. They offered the ability to surprise. Sophie never returned to the professional arena. She continued her freight runs, moving cargo between stations and keeping her business running. But occasionally, when she passed through stations with combat arenas, she would receive messages from fighters who had adopted human techniques. And sometimes, on quiet nights between hyperspace jumps, she would receive messages from Croth9. The warrior had returned to competition, but his style had changed. He no longer relied solely on his reflexes. He incorporated feints and deception, making himself harder to predict. His win record continued to grow, but now each victory taught him something new. The lesson Sophie had given him wasn't just about fighting. It was about adaptation, humility, and the understanding that there was always more to learn. In defeating him, she had given him the greatest gift one warrior could give another, the chance to become better. And somewhere in the vastness of space, on a freight ship hauling engine parts between forgotten stations, Sophie Grant smiled at that thought. She'd never wanted to be a teacher again, but maybe in her own way she still was. Just with a much larger classroom than she'd ever imagined.